Hello and welcome to another episode of Ideaprov. I'm your host, Mike Pedersen, and today we have a really abstract topic that we want to get to that'll really kind of stretch your brains and make you think about a little bit things a little differently. But first, I want to introduce our co-creator for today. Her name is Abby. I met her through a mutual friend online, and we really kind of clicked. And we talked about the idea and the topic, and she was really enthusiastic and excited about doing it. So, Abby, how are you? Tell us how your day's been so far.
Doing good. Just jumped out of the shower, so I'm shiny clean and ready to go for this.
That's always helpful when you get clean. You know what I mean? It's a different mindset, different feeling. Like you feel like ready for the day, so I'm all about that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like with the topic that we're going to talk about today, just sort of washing your way is like a good way to get started with this. So, yeah.
Awesome. So with that, talking about just kind of being clean and kind of recentering your focus, what kind of has your focus right now? Like what's on the top? This is your moment, your segment to kind of tell us, what you're passionate about.
Yeah, so, I've always thought of myself as somebody that looks at the world just slightly different, maybe a little bit of a different tilt, and I flip problems around and look for solutions, until they kind of fit into this ideal picture. And then I kind of play it backwards of like, okay, if this is ideal, like what's the obstacles to getting to ideal, and solve those kinds of things. So, I'm a really firm believer in, with systemic problems, right? You need very holistic approaches to how you want to solve those things. So, I'm super excited to be here with Ideaprov because just in general, like I'm a little bit of a role-playing game nerd, and I like to do like game playing on my weekends. Yes, Dungeons and Dragons is a really fun thing because it's nothing but sort of challenges and what would you do, and you get to kind of play somebody else while you're doing that. So yes, that's just a little about me. But something that I would say I'm really, really passionate about is the foundation that my family started. And it's called Carmen's Angel Fund. And so Carmen was my niece, and 2 years ago in February, we lost her to a shunt complication. So she had a condition that's called hydrocephalus. And so her Angel Fund, we do a lot of fundraising for research and treatment options because for the most part, the only way to sort of treat that condition, which for your listeners that maybe don't know what that is, normally your spinal fluid, right, it flows through your nervous system. And for her, it didn't work correctly. So that fluid could build up in her brain. And so she had to have a medical device called a shunt, which would drain that excess fluid down into her abdomen. And when she was about 7.5 years old, it had a catastrophic failure. And so we ended up losing her. So on her birthday, we started a fund, right, to try to help other kids. But one of the things we did, around that is we did do organ donation. So that's another thing that I really am a strong advocate for. And especially when you're looking at kids, what a lot of people don't understand is, a 6-year-old, little girl with a heart condition, she can't just go and get an adult-sized heart put in her. She has to have one of a child that's near her size, near her age, which in those situations, right, you're kind of maybe hoping a little bit for somebody else's child. Like it's kind of a weird situation. But one of the things that we did is we did organ donation, and my niece was an angel for 5 different people. She saved a little girl with her heart. She saved a little boy with the liver donation, and then she saved 2 adults with her kidney donations, and then gave another lady her sight back through donating the corneas. I will say, it's incredibly hard to sit in the hospital room and make that decision, but even through such immense almost debilitating grief in that moment, to know that you can save those, that many people gave us, definitely some solace. So it's just something I've become really, really passionate about. And advocating for.
I mean, thank you for educating me, because I was not aware of only the condition on one end, but when he started talking about it, it really made me think, like, because my first brain is like, okay, well, it goes to the same about, transplant list and whatever, but their bodies are so tiny, like they can't take a regular sized person. And everybody talks about, transplant with kidneys and all this kind of stuff for adults, but for children, the probability is super small to be able to find something that fits, just one in their body. And then you have to think about like blood types and all those other different factors and variables. And then, of course, like you said, in the hospital, trying to make those decisions is extremely challenging and difficult. And, me in my situation, like, I'd lose it if, something happened to my little one, but, it's really profound that you guys started it. So how do people find out more, potentially get involved? Do you guys like have a foundation or a website or something for people to be able to research and share?
Yeah, so we've got on Facebook, you can go to Carmen's Angel Fund and like the page. We also are on Twitter as well. So both of them, you're looking for Carmen's Angel Fund.
Carmen's Angel Fund. I think it's something that probably needs to be talked about a little bit more, just organ donation. I believe I'm one for, because you have to put on your driver's license and stuff like that to be able to help. But it's those little things that, like you talk about, if you helped, 5 people get their sight back, like those are monumental kind of changing things for people to be able to do. And it's little things that, I shouldn't say little, but it's those things that can help make the world kind of a better place, with people being able to live a higher quality of life. Unfortunately, something something negative had to come from that, but that's a good way to turn a negative into a positive,
Yeah, well, and you bring up an excellent point, right? You've got to sign the back of your driver's license, but the other part of that is you also need to tell your family your wishes, because your family is still going to have to give the authorization in that moment. They're still going to have to make the call of saying, like, hey, this is what Mike wants. Hey, this is what Abby wants. They have to have the strength of knowing your wishes to know how to decide in that moment. So, it's take both steps, right? Not just sign, but also tell your family what your wishes are. Just to ensure that, I've been a firm advocate of like, look, I can't take it with me. So if it can help save somebody else's life, if it can give somebody back, moments in their life that they wouldn't have, because you're going to lose me anyway. Like, family, do it. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't take it with me.
Yeah, like kind of like, what's the point, right? Like, I want to take it with me just so that way I can have it. Like, if you can give somebody else sight or, like another better chance at life, and especially if it's a child, you have to think, like, it's completely different if they're older, maybe somebody's in their 50s, like, they've already had a pretty decent amount of life that they've experienced. But when you're talking children, 5, 6, 7 years old, like, their entire life is ahead of them. Like, giving them the opportunity to be able to bring great things to the world. Like, I don't know, you could be somebody who could make some profound, cancer research or something like that. The limitations for that child are unlimited at that point. So why not give it back? So we're talking about, like, bring good things to the world, and that's a very tender story that I think will resonate with some people out there. So we'll definitely, like I said, share that information. But it kind of brings us to that topic that we have for today, which was the concept of life, and that story is allowing others to live their life. But our theme for today was, how can you make peace with our unlived lives? My first thought with this is, we have to be okay with the concept of changing, and how our lives will ebb and flow and shift, from the time that we're, super childhood, adolescence, young adults into middle-aged and into, our senior years, and be okay with that fluidity of the person that you think that you're probably going to be is probably not going to be the case. The items that you're going to learn aren't going to maybe impact you or maybe not impact you in the same way. But having the concept of a constant evolution of what your life is going to be like, I think is a way that you can come to terms with the decisions you make. And if you're coming to terms with those decisions, then it'll be a little bit easier to be okay with those lives that, you might not have lived if you went a different path. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think, when I look at that and I think about this topic of like, how do you make peace, right, with a potentially unlived part of your life, I think we all have these, or at least I do, maybe you do. I had these certain milestone ages, right, where I thought I would be, and fill in the blank, right? I thought I would be, say, married by 28. I thought I would be, a parent by a certain age, right? And for me, my life has taken a completely different track. And in some ways, you almost have to reconcile who you are now with who you thought you'd be when you kind of put that, that idea in your head. And I think one of the things that's maybe helped me personally find that peace is, turning that from a me thing into an external, like, okay, maybe it wasn't what I thought I would be doing, but what have I done for the rest, for the world, like the world outside of me? Have I brought value? Have I brought something else that maybe I never thought I would bring, say when I was 18 looking at 28, right? When I was 28 looking at 35, right? And obviously I'm not going to keep going because I'm older than 35, but I'm not going to share how much older, right? Typical woman answer. I'm not going to share my age exactly.
Nobody's asking you. That is your prerogative. It's one thing that I've been trying to kind of wrangle with is to, like, where does this start, right? Like, how do we come up with this idea of what our self is? And what I keep leading back to is maybe it's the thoughts that are initially put into our heads with the stuff that we consume and the people that we interact with at a young age, right? So early childhood, they talk anywhere between 6, 10, whatever the case is, oftentimes little girls and boys look at TV shows and you think maybe Disney movies, right? So oftentimes it's, the Cinderellas, the Mulans or whatever of the world, and little girls watch that and they think, all right, knight in shining armor is supposed to save me, that whole thing, and then maybe they might not actualize as many experiences as they have, or kind of creates a distorted, like they always have to be saved, or maybe doesn't empower them as much, or potentially it's like, for example, parents will say, hey, I think you're really smart in this and you should be a doctor, or I think you're really smart in that, you should be an engineer. And so as we grow older, we start to try and, of course, please what our parents say, because they're the most profound voices in our heads and at that, at those developmental stages. And so when we get into our early 20s, 30s, we still try and actualize on that, looking for our parents' gratification. And then when we have this conflict in our brain about, hey, my dad wants me to be a doctor or a lawyer, but I'm not really sure I want to do that, and how to reconcile and split apart and be okay with the fact that I don't want to be a lawyer or I don't want to be a doctor. I think we have to have some authentic conversations to start with those people who are very influential in our lives, and impart to them that this might not be the path that I want to go on.
Yeah, well,
I want to try something different.
Very similar, situation in my upbringing, right? So when I was in high school, I was like one of the top in my state for golf. And so it was just, it was expected. You will go to college on on a scholarship. Like, you will go and try to play Division I golf. And I had a car accident that fractured my lower back, right? Playing golf, you can't really play that so well, on a fractured back. And I think it was much easier for me to make peace with that's not going to be my future than it was for, say, my father, who had invested so much time and so much money and following me around on, junior tours and paying for, the tournaments and paying for the lessons and paying for the camps. And, I think he had a much harder time with that than maybe I did. I think I was able to maybe shed that part of my identity much easier than it was for him. So I think, your parents played a very big influence into sort of that identity that you see yourself falling into as you go forward in life. But, interestingly enough, this past week I was taking a class from Dr. Robert Cialdini, his group, so Influence at Work. And I found it very interesting when we were talking about things like social proof of what is the influence, right, of teenagers from their peer group. And I'm kind of thumbing through to say, like, okay, how much, and what they found when they did like a study on the rates of teen smoking, right? And it was like, okay, if your parents smoke, right, it created a bit of an influence, right? And it was not, 20-30%. I don't have all the numbers right in front of me. But if you had like 2 friends in your peer group as a teenager that smoked, you were like 200 times more likely to smoke because the influence of your peer group. So I think, yes, the parents have a huge impact, especially in the early years. But I think as you get older, the peer group that you're trying to identify with also formulates that quite substantially. And so I think there's a lot of pressure at that point to, oh, well, this is the group of friends that I have, or this is the group of friends that I want to stay in this peer group. So I've got to do, I've got to go for the same degree, or I've got to like the same sports, or I've got to, eat the same way, or, do the same activities so that I can stay sort of in group, as opposed to being, out of the group and potentially like having to find a new peer group to spend time with.
Yeah, it's important because I think it kind of goes back. I mean, and not to get too far off, but from a kind of a biological standpoint, like, you want to fit in from some type of a group because, I don't know, if you go back to caveman times or whatever you want to believe in, like, you don't want to be ostracized. You don't want to be out by yourself. So, you have to find this balance of how much, I want to be part of a tribe, because if, things go crazy, I at least have some people that kind of have my back, right? And especially in that young adulthood and period and, adolescence time, like, friends are the most important things in the world. Mom and dad don't know anything at that time. They're old and cranky and, they have no idea, no concept of anything. So, like, the friends are gold. And now it's probably like followers are gold, with the invention of the social media and all that kind of jazz.
Well, and I think that gets you into a place of, with social media, right? Is now you have to maintain some kind of image that's expected because you've gotten followers for this reason or that reason. And so, I think that can also cause you to be in a situation where you're maybe not living the life you want to live, but you've almost taken the external factor and now that's become your reason, your compelling reason to exist, instead of maybe something that's more authentically you.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that because it's, I'm thinking with a lot of the stuff that's, coming on from a political level, right? And just influences have jumped all over that to be able to try and influence people in different ways. And it's interesting to see how, how do you, I guess, remove those triggers and be more authentic to yourself, and to look at and say, okay, they have an entirely different life than I do. they come from a different background. They have completely different background and life experiences and parents and observations and whatever. So why am I trying to emulate or acquiesce to that potential lifestyle and trying to, I guess, split it apart, to have a healthier boundary to say, hey, maybe I want to look at fancy pictures and whatever, but at the same time saying, like, that's not me, that's not my goals. Those aren't the things that I particularly want. They're cool to look at, yeah, absolutely, the fancy caves and the cool parties or whatever the case is, but that's not what's important to me. And finding what's important to you is, I think, kind of the core of the issue, right? So finding that life that you want to live, to say, hey, listen, these are the things that are important from a career standpoint. I want to have, maybe it's X amount of money that allows me to live the lifestyle that I want. I want to have, like you were talking about before, by 28, potentially become a parent, or at least meet my significant other that I want for my future or something like that. And to understand what that path looks like for you, but to also understand that you have to be flexible in it too, because you don't know what's going to change in the next 6 months, year. I mean, who planned COVID? Nobody. Like, I've talked with people and we're like, hey, I was thinking about potentially having children, but now I don't know. So it's having that wherewithal, that internal, I guess, clock, to be able to say, hey, these are the items that I want to have, but don't be so tied to the time frame in which they occur. Yeah.
Well, and the mental model that I like to use myself is date the picture, don't marry it, right? If you marry it, right, you can't, then it shouldn't change, right? You've pledged your vow and this is what it's going to be, right? But allow it to shift, allow it to change, and see the value in how it changes. As long as that core of what you're doing, the life you're living, is something authentically you, and in my mind brings sort of the greatest good to yourself and others, right? Then I think it's maybe a place where you can find the peace of, like, hey, this milestone that was in my head, it hasn't happened yet. Doesn't mean that it won't ever happen. Maybe not, but I'm okay with it because I've done these other valuable things that are still authentically me.
And to change, like, I guess finding what's that authentic, valuable me piece, right? And to say, hey, look at, if you find what's authentically you can then kind of create that plan. And it's like you said, being flexible with the time frame that it involves, and not being so rigid. So it reminds me of a story of a woman that I used to work with, and she was extremely heavily focused on her wedding, and she had planned out her wedding to the nth degree, like down to every single detail, what single flower, what single arrangement, whatever. Didn't even have a boyfriend. Like, nobody that was of interest to her, but her entire wedding was planned. And I remember talking with her, and I was saying, how much energy and did you put into this? And I said, and on top of that, like, one, does your groom have any say in any of this whatsoever, that you were thinking about going with? And I said, but how much joy is potentially sucked out of that moment because you wanted it to be perfect? All the planning, everything that you've done ahead of time, it's great and you want to be prepared, but at the same time, does being neurotic on that day, does that suck away some of the impact, some of the just, I don't know, organic joy of the event, and so that those organic kind of joy moments are kind of what life is all about. It seems to make it. If people would kind of internalize those, you could realize, hey, those are what's kind of the focus of what I'm going for. If you have more of those, rather than potentially on the other side trying to, form your life perfectly along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I've known people just like what you're describing, right? Where it's like, it's all about the wedding. And I've had similar conversations of like, okay, you put all of this energy into the perfect wedding, but you need to put that energy into having the happy marriage, right? This is one day. And yes, the pictures will last forever. And yes, you'll look back and smile, but the point isn't the wedding. The point is the marriage. And it's almost encouraging people to take a step back, right? Because I think, especially with wedding planning, I haven't had my own wedding. I'll admit that. I've been a bridesmaid and a maid of honor in a lot of weddings. So I've seen that sort of that stress level, right, of trying to plan, and you want this, you want the pretty pictures and you want the perfect reception, and and it's like at the end of the day, whether it went exactly the way it was in your head or not, the happiness was who was there. And those people, they're unpredictable. They're gonna do what they're gonna do at your wedding, right? They may not dance the perfect way that you wanted during a particular song, or the tables might get served out of order. Did that ruin the day? No, not really, right? So put the energy into what's valuable in the day, or at least that's kind of the way I look at it. Of take the step back, right? Especially if you're in a moment of just being like,
yeah,
about everything.
You just need that moment to kind of, whatever. And so it's like, for those type of moments in life, it's like, okay, well, what happens, for example, let's just take the wedding kind of analogy. You gotta look at those decision points in life and say, hey, well, what happens if everything goes perfectly? Does it mean that my marriage is going to go perfectly? Not necessarily. It's two completely kind of different things. Each one is just a moment in time. There's perfect examples of where people have had wonderful marriages and terrible wedding days. Like, my parents are, believe it or not, one of the worst things. And they've told me this story a couple of times, and it's really crazy, but my parents have been married, I think, oh goodness, going on 40 years now. But on their wedding day, it was a mountain of disasters that just happens. I mean, there was no AC in the church. The wedding, I think Mama's wedding dress was damaged somehow. Two of my mom's brothers got in a car accident that day, completely totaled the car. Like, the car was in like a mangled mess. Both of them walked out without a scratch. I think one of the rings was lost or something like that, or didn't show up. They took pictures, and of all the pictures, they were supposed to get them like 3 or 4 days later. But in that time, the photographer's house burned down. So literally, they have like one or two pictures of their actual wedding day. Like, it's just these dominoes of just horrible, just events that could happen. But they're like, it's just one day, and they've been happy ever since. Like, they never fight. And so it's like, it's these decision points that you have to think, okay, what happens if things go a different way, right? That's a life that I've never lived, but it's okay, because I don't know what all of the, I guess, butterfly effect things afterwards, after that decision, might have looked like. You could have had a perfect day, but then all of a sudden all these bad things happen later in life. And so you have to realize that they're not like, all of your life events are not connected. And to be okay with the decision that you make right now about whatever you're doing is the best decision that you think you can make at the time. And I think that's, for a lot of people, it's kind of difficult, because they always want to perceive that they can make the best decision, and anticipate what the results of that decision will be. And we don't know. You just have to keep going.
It's all plan A, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's all plan A. No matter what twists and turns it takes, it's always the path that you're on, right? And you make of it what you will. And it's up to you to make it what what you want it to be, right? So if it's really important, you're going to find some way to make that happen for yourself, and understand that what was important, maybe a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if it hasn't happened, it kind of take that moment to be introspective and go, okay, was it really important, right? Is it really something I still want to kind of pursue, or am I okay with where it is now? But in general, I try to always put the lens of, it's all plan A, even if it's not working out the way I thought it was going to, previously, it's still in a good place, right? And if it's not in a good place, it's up to me to put it in that good place for me, right? Not the good place for somebody else, but the good place for me, because I'm living my life, not somebody else. They're living their life.
Right. I mean, how do you think, I guess what's the frequency in which you feel like you should kind of take that moment to be able to look at whether plan A is still what you want? Like, is it per decision? Is it, is there a specific length of time? I mean, not to put you on the spot, but I'm just thinking about how we go about life, right? Like, how long do we stay on plan A if we feel it might not be what we want anymore?
Yeah. I've always found that life will tell me when to take that break, right? The system always kind of tells me when it's going off track. And I've had those moments, I'll admit, I had maybe what some might call like sort of a nervous breakdown at one point in my life, where it was just like, okay, I've put all of my energy into career. And then I had like a bad review at work where I didn't get the kind of rating that I thought I should get. And I was just like, all of a sudden it checked me up. And it was like, wait a second, like, this is what I've put all my energy into. And now you're telling me like, I'm not good at this, or that I didn't do as well as I thought I did. And it made me pause in that moment. It told me take that step back and really look at it and evaluate. And, I made some changes at that point. I went and I said, okay, there's some things I need to like really work out for myself. And I did that work, right? I did that kind of mental work for myself. And I looked at what aspects of my job were bringing me joy and which ones were kind of sucking my life out. And I had enough courage to go to my bosses at that point and say, look, here's the stuff that doesn't really make me happy to work here. So how can we work on these that they have, a different expectation or a different, can we do anything with this, right? And they had the option to tell me yes or no. Now, I was happy that they said, yes, we'll work out some ways that we can adjust this, get you some help here and do things a little bit differently because they valued me as an employee, so that was a good thing. But you have to, I think, when those moments present themselves, take that moment to be introspective and then kind of formulate what is the new plan and then go execute it, right? And be willing to let it shift, right? Because especially when you're dealing with other people, right? They have the same free will that you do. So just because it's what you want doesn't mean that that's going to meet kind of their needs anymore. So allow that to be a negotiation. And then you can kind of move forward and you make decisions and you figure out where the path is going, where plan A is really going.
Yeah, where plan is going, and you kind of brought up a good point because it feels like when you went to your bosses and you had that kind of change of momentum is you have to kind of take the temperature on your own life sometimes in different aspects, right? So whether it's your health, whether it's your career, whether it's your social life or your family, your friends, your aspirations, your ambitions, or whatever. And if you feel that they're out of balance or not where you want them to be, like, you have to kind of take the initiative to right that ship, right? And when you right that ship, I think it makes it easier to be able to look at the other decisions and say, that wasn't what I wanted. Because I've refocused. Maybe you're in a bad relationship or something like that. You said, you know what, I got out of that relationship, and been by myself, focused on myself, and then now I feel better and feel more confident. I feel more energized about life because I got out of that, maybe a toxic relationship. And so by doing so, that could make it easier to look at that relationship and like, that was a life that I could have been on if I continued on with that relationship. But would I have been happy? Maybe not, because obviously I'm feeling more powerful, more enabled at the moment because I'm not in that relationship. And so taking that moment to be able to, I guess, kind of organize your life and say, hey, what's really important, kind of recenter, is I think really huge to allowing people to be okay with the decisions that they make and be okay with the life that they haven't lived and kind of make peace with it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I just, as you're talking and as our conversation is unfolding, that's kind of resonating with me is just life takes courage, and it's not for the faint of heart, right? My mother always used to tell me, like, getting old is not for the faint of heart. Like, it's tough. It's tough to become an old person. There's a reason why we're a little bit crusty, right? Like, we're a little bit grouchy. Like, we've lived a lot, and, it's taken incredible courage. And, so that's just one of the things that's kind of resonating with me right now, listening to you talk of, and sort of reflect on this moment of just the incredible amount of courage that it takes to be introspective, to change paths, and to find that happiness with where you're going, where you are and where you're going.
Yeah. I mean, just to, play devil's advocate for the conversation, do you ever feel that there is a time in which it is okay to, I don't want to use the word wallow, but if you make a decision that you then feel is the incorrect decision, to be able to address that in any way? Like, is that a healthy thing to do? Or is it something that we just kind of need to live and let live and throw it off to the wayside?
I mean, I think there's certainly a grieving point, right, with anything that becomes a loss or moving away from something. And I think it's important to have those moments of grief. But I think that, again, you're looking for the balance. At what point has it stopped being grieving and it's become something else, right? That's now taking away from the rest of the life that you have to live. And each person has to figure out where that point is. But, I think the people around you, kind of going back to sort of where this conversation started, is, when you're looking at your peer group is going to give you kind of cues, right? There's going to be a certain point where they're saying, okay, Mike, Abby, like, come back, right? We've lost you, come back, right? Your family is going to have those kinds of moments with you as well, of saying, like, I understand that this bad thing has happened. I understand that you're grieving maybe the loss of something. How do I help you move forward, right? And I think that's the triggers that you're looking for to say, okay, has this now gone from something cathartic and healing into something else, where now I may be on pause in my life or stuck.
Being paused or stuck is never kind of a good place. And I think, when you were talking, it really kind of triggered the thought of me is to, like he's talking about, finding that grieving point for maybe decisions that didn't go you perceived at the moment that didn't go your way, or that you didn't like. But I think the key is to kind of learn from it, right? Is to kind of acknowledge it to yourself, and then also to in the face of others, that maybe that wasn't a decision that was right for me. One of the ones that kind of always triggers in my brain is just because I'm oftentimes extremely analytical. My dad used to tell me I should be an engineer. He's like, you love to figure out these random things and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And originally I started to go for like engineering. And went to college and started, and I just kind of realized, I was like, it's just not really for me. And so every single time I talk with him, I've told him before, I'm like, I don't know, engineering just might not be it, Dad. And he's like, okay. He's like, that's fine. He's like, find what that thing is. And my parents have always been supportive in going down that road. But to bring it back, like nowadays when I go on my analytical tangents, he's like, see, you should have been an engineer. I'm like, yeah, I know, Dad. And we always have a good laugh about it. But it's getting to that point to where you understand that was a moment in time that I went down this path, that I thought it might be something for me, but I realized it's not. And that's okay, because I've grown as a person. I found a different path. And to look back at it with favor and look at that decision and be like, that was a growing moment. At that moment in time, I realized that I learned that maybe I didn't want to be an engineer. There's nothing wrong with that, because I didn't actualize that particular goal of mine at the time. And to keep the chain moving. And I found when you acknowledge it, like, it takes that power away. It takes that fear away, that let's say not necessarily a loss, but that negative impression of that particular instance. And now we laugh about it and we joke about it. He says the same thing about like being a doctor. I love to watch surgeries on TV, when they cut people open and stuff like that. And, my lady's like, you probably should have been a doctor. You're not squeamish with blood and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah. Did I want to go down the whole school path to be a doctor for 9-10 years and do all that kind of stuff? Not really, and that's okay, but saying it, voicing it so that way it doesn't end up spiraling in your head and kind of creating that negative impression of it is, I think, been really huge for me to kind of just let go and be like, hey, that's just not the life that I had planned for my life that I'm focusing on now. That was a previous decision in life. That was a previous Mike. Old Mike maybe wanted to be a doctor. That's all right.
Yeah.
This Mike doesn't want to be.
Exactly. And I had certainly those same things. I think a doctor was somewhere in my path. At one point, that was maybe a goal that was there. But my family really thought, okay, you're gonna run our company someday. So it was like, you're gonna be a CEO someday. But I don't actually, I don't get a lot of fulfillment and joy from managing people. So that's
might need that if you're gonna be a CEO. Just
a little bit, right? So it was like, look, that might be your path for me, but that's not my path for me. My path is something different. My career has gone in completely different directions. I teach a lot of, management skills, right? But it's, I'm maybe that cliche of do as I say, not as I do. Because I don't actually manage teams, but I understand systemic thinking and management techniques, right? And ways to help people that are good at it up their game, right? Another level. And that's, which is definitely, at 18, 21, 22 coming out of college, that's not what I thought I would be doing. Life went a totally different path. So, but it needs to be okay that the plan changed.
Yeah, and you're talking about realizing that your plan is going to change, your life is going to change as you grow. There's some things that I want to, for each individual's life, there's certain characteristics, and you spoke to it a few minutes ago, which was maybe you potentially want to be a parent, or you want to find a significant other, or maybe you want to run a company, or you want to start a nonprofit organization, whatever the case is. But the timing for it is completely different, right? Not everything has to be done on the timeline that you intended to have it. Okay, maybe I want to start a nonprofit. That doesn't mean that I can't start it at 65, at 70, as long as I start. One of the ones for me is at some point in time in my life, I told myself I wanted something after, like I wanted after my name, meaning either, you know, an MD to be a doctor or a PhD to be a doctor or something like that. Like I wanted that, and I still do, but it's not something that I want right now. Like I'm envisioning when I'm 75 and retired and have nothing else to do, then I'm gonna go get my doctorate, have it for like 10 years, and then I'll be dead. But I'll be like, hey, I checked it off the box. Like I'm good, you know. That's my thought process. Done it. Like I checked it. Like I'm not attached to it being right now.
Yeah. And that just shows it's not a piece of the identity you're trying to create, right? It's something to enhance life. It's not the thing to make your life.
Ooh, that's a good one. Like you have to look at those decisions as things to enhance. So, excellent. Well, I want to be respectful of Abby's time. And so I think we've got a lot of good nuggets and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do now is kind of do a little recap of all the good stuff that kind of rose to the top. And you let me know if we missed anything. Okay. So when we're talking about being at peace with our unlived lives, some of the things that we need to kind of take in mind is to talk with the influencers of our young adult selves about the path that we want to take and have that courage to be able to do so. So telling our parents, telling our peer groups to say, hey, listen, I understand that you may think that I am good with this or that I have all the skills or aptitude, but that's not something that I particularly want to do. Like that's not the path that I'm on. Be flexible with the time frame for your decisions of how you want to go about your life. You can have different skills, different things that you want to achieve, but make sure that they're fluid and so you can tackle them at any point, for example, in your life. Be okay with the decisions that you make and having the courage to say that, hey, it's okay if a decision didn't pan out the way that I had originally anticipated. Take the temperature on your life on a regular, consistent basis. So whether it's your social life, your career path that you're going on, your health and wellness, your mental, kind of well-being, the aspirations that you have, like find a way to get those in balance at a regular interval so that way you can be okay when decisions might not pan out okay, because you know that that's the best decision that you could have made at that point in time. And then for those decisions that you may feel that didn't go a potentially great way, is have a grieving point for those decisions and make sure you learn from them. Acknowledge those decisions that was the best decision that I could have made at that particular moment in time, and then communicate to people in your closest inner circle to say, hey, yep, I made that decision. It might not have been great, but I'm moving forward because I'm learning from it and I'm on to the next. So that helps remove all the power from anything that you weren't able to actualize in that other life that you had. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you summed it up perfect.
Well, I'm really happy with the points that we got from the show. I think we got 4 or 5 nuggets. We'll definitely put that together and kind of get it for more people to consist with. But I really have to take a moment to say, Abby, thank you for all of your time today and your insights and bringing together some of these nuggets of wisdom about how to better balance, I guess, our internal selves and our own aspirations and stuff like that. So thank you so much for sharing the time with us.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Well, we'll definitely have you on the show again. But for those listeners, that kind of wraps up our show today. You can always interact with us using the handle @Ideaprov on all of our social media channels, and then look out for the blog post in a little while, so that way you can kind of continue the conversation with us and kind of extrapolate more there. Stay tuned after the break, and we'll look out for our Ideaprov Insight. So for this Ideaprov Insight, I want to share with you something called the Feynman Technique. This is a technique for finding the best way to learn anything. So this is done by a physicist, and the technique goes like this. So you choose a concept or topic, and you try and teach it to a young child. From there, you find the gaps in your knowledge or the areas in which you were a little bit fumbling over your words. Go back to your source material and you know where to approach and learn more about the topic for a better understanding. This helps remove just not knowing the name of something, but then also being able to articulate it as well, increasing the probability that you're going to actually retain the information. So I wanted to share this with you because I thought it would be very helpful for people to better techniques to help them learn. Until next time.